This story happened to me 4 years ago when I was in my mid-20s. This whole experience will probably scar me for life, and it's still vividly imprinted in my mind. The day was the 15th hour of June, and I had the house to myself because my parents were on a 2-week vacation in France. It was sometime after dusk, probably around 8 p.m, and the weather was scorching hot. Believe me when I say I was sweating my arse off with just my tank top and shorts on. The heat was so unbearable that I allowed in some fresh air, opening all the living room and bedroom windows, planning on closing them right before hitting the hay. Now, before fast forwarding. I must mention that I was feeling extremely exhausted. On that same day, I had taken 3 exams in the morning and played a volleyball match in the afternoon. Thus, once I ate my dinner while browsing social media in my room, I collapsed into bed without even realizing I woke up at around 3 a.m. to the muffled sounds of thunderbolts and a draft of cold, fresh air hitting my face. A strong wind was blowing and all the shutters left open were noisily banging, still drowsy. I flicked on the lamp, but the light wouldn't turn on. I checked the plug using my phone flashlight, but everything was fine. I begrudgingly climbed out of bed and looked out of my bedroom window. There were menacing, rainy black clouds in the horizon. A typical late-night summer storm was approaching, given that every lamppost in the street was off. I instantly knew there had been a blackout phone flashlight in hand. I dizzily headed down the hallway to shut. The windows closed before rain started pouring down. When I got to the last window, though, I noticed the mosquito nut lifted up. This struck me as weird, since I was quite positive I hadn't left it that way. Getting a little paranoid, I turned behind me to shine the flashlight around the living room and check my surroundings. The furniture was still in place, no drawers or closet doors left open, no decorative objects missing or moved in unfamiliar positions. Everything seemed normal. I briefly peeked my head out of my window to look outside. Trees swaying in the howling wind, leaves shaking in a frenzy. Powerful display of nature's force, but still nothing remotely suspicious. Maybe the mechanism is faulty, or the strong wind somehow pushed it up. Against my better judgment, I convinced myself it was useless to lose sleep over it, feeling relieved. I closed the shutters and started walking back to my bedroom, eager to get a decent night's rest. Little did I know that night would be anything but pleasant. I happened to casually turn my head to the flight of stairs connected to the attic, when a vivid burst of light flashing from up there caught my eyes. I paid no mind. The attic was adorned with huge glass windows, so it was no wonder to see lights spreading across the room. It was probably a sheet lightning. I kept walking subconsciously, waiting for the thunder to come, but it never did. I stopped in my tracks. Given that the flash I saw was powerful and bright, the lightning had to be pretty close, so why couldn't any rumbling noise be heard? I started to think maybe it wasn't lightning, but if it was a flashlight. As doubt crept in my heart, began to race. I quickly put 2 and 2 together, and now the strange occurrence of the mosquito net left up made much more sense. The nightmarish realization hit me that an intruder could have broken into my house. At first I panicked. Did they hear me shutting the windows? Were they carrying any weapons? Did they plan on just robbing my house? Or did they also have worse intentions? Normally I would call my parents to deal with it, but since they were away, it was all on me now. While those sickening thoughts were swirling in my mind, the distinct sound of a doorknob being twisted and turned made me instantly snap out of my catatonic state. I shot my head to face the living room entrance, and through the glass frame I spotted a shadowy figure just a few inches outside of the front door. There was a person standing there, most likely an accomplice of the guy upstairs. Words are not enough to describe how powerless and defenseless I felt, despite the overwhelming fear. I did my best to keep my cool, trying to make as little noise as possible. I tiptoed in the direction of the stairs leading down to the basement, which was directly connected to the garage. I figured I could safely escape from there while I was making my descent down, still using my phone as a source of light. I dialed 911 and speaking as softly as possible, I informed the operator about what just happened. He tried to calm me down and reassured me that the police would be there in less than 10 minutes. He also added, I should lock myself in a safe room and wait for the officers to show up. I was about to reply that I could easily sneak outside through the garage door when all of a sudden I lost the call. I immediately checked the phone and realized that down there I had no signal, as if it wasn't enough. I also noticed the battery was almost dead. Once I reached the basement, I nervously assessed what to do. I could try and find an emergency flashlight, but now I was so close to escaping from the house that I didn't want to waste time rummaging through the drawers. Besides, I was mindful that the intruders upstairs could have heard me. So in the heat of the moment, I exited the basement as fast as I could. Nonetheless, while making my way towards the garage door, I got a feeling in my gut telling me I was being watched. I don't even know why. Maybe my sixth sense had picked up on something. But I pointed my phone to illuminate the back seats of my car, and there he was, a man's face stuck to the rearview mirror, a disgusting, revolting face with dead, bulging, wide eyes, and a malicious yellowish grin spreading across its cheeks. He kept staring at me so intently it almost looked like he was piercing into my soul. He slid his dirty hand against the glass, waving me hello in an unnatural slow motion, and at that point it happened. My phone battery died, turning off the flashlight and leaving me in the middle of a total darkness. I felt my heart in my throat. I had never been more scared in my entire life. My whole body was quivering and shaking in fear. When I heard the car door opening, I lost it. I screamed like a little girl as I somehow managed to unlock the garage door and bolt outside, climbing up the driveway ramp. By that time, heavy rain had started pouring down. I hopped over the gate and ran to the nearest house, yelling like a lunatic for the neighbors to rush outside. They came out in shock, and I explained to them the whole situation, almost out of breath and soaking wet. In the meantime, I heard sirens in the distance. 2 police cars rolled down the street, and I practically ran into the officer's arm, screaming that there were 3 strangers in my house. 4 agents went into my house, guns drawn, while another one took my description of the events. Those 3 men were all gone though, and to this day, I don't think they've ever been caught. Some antiques which held some value were stolen. However, I must say it was no big deal for my family. For the remainder of the night, I couldn't sleep at all. I kept tossing and turning, jumping at the slightest sounds, ruminating relentlessly on the horrific experience. But I kid you not, another chilling surprise was lying in wait. When morning came, I spotted a small piece of paper sticking out of the edge of my bed. I picked it up and went frozen stiff. The following words were written: "Bye-bye, beauty. You look cute when you sleep." Around 10 years ago, I moved out of my mom's house into my first apartment in the city of Chicago. The place was a nice 3B bedroom apartment on the south side of the city in a friendly neighborhood by the University of Illinois. I lived with 2 roommates, Tom and Mike. Mike was a good friend of mine, while Tom was a good friend of Mike's, who I had not met prior, although we ended up getting along just fine. One night, about a month after moving in, I met up with a few friends of mine for drinks at a bar more in the center of the city, around 10 minutes from my place. It was a good time, and I ended up getting slightly drunk before getting into a cab at 1 a.m. and heading home. Upon walking into my apartment, I noticed that Tom's door was open, showing that he was staying at his girlfriend's place, while Mike's door was closed with the light from his TV shining underneath the crack. I'd made my way to my bedroom and put on my own TV before lying down to prepare for sleep. After around 10 minutes, I heard my doorbell ring half asleep. I woke up confused as it was 1:30 in the morning, so I ignored it. A few seconds later, the doorbell rang again, and then again a few seconds after that. It's important to mention that my roommate Mike had a good amount of side cash by dealing weed to a few people. He was also a huge stoner himself, so the idea that he fell asleep while waiting for a late-night customer to come over was not out of the realm of possibility. With this in mind, I went over to my intercom and asked who was there. A girl's voice answered back, "It's Emma. I'm here to see Mike." Thinking that my suspicions had been confirmed, I exited out of my front door and headed down the stairs. The door to the outside of our apartment building was made of tall glass, so you could easily identify any potential visitors here. I saw an attractive college-age blonde girl with glasses waiting patiently outside. I had never seen this person before. However, she appeared to be non-threatening, and besides having random customers over to grab weed, Mike would also have some random girls over to hook up with from time to time. Because of this, I let my guard down slightly and cracked the door open. The girl then repeated what she had said moments earlier over the intercom. "Hi, I'm here to see Mike," I replied. "Okay, he's here, just follow me up," and I held the door open for her. She grabbed the handle and I turned around to head back up the stairs. As I was walking back up, I quickly noticed that this Emma girl was not following me up. I glanced over my shoulder and saw that she was still standing outside, holding the door open. Only now, she was staring off to her right, almost as if waiting for someone. At this moment, a tidal wave of fear crashed over me as I realized something horrible was more than likely about to happen. I continued walking up to my place quicker, now after turning the corner of the stairs. I heard the door swing open and then heavy footsteps running up the stairs behind me. I looked over my shoulder again, and what I saw shook me to my core. A tall, gangly man with sunken eyes, greasy, long-haired down to his shoulders, was running up the stairs straight at me. He was wearing a sleeveless black t-shirt, and apart from the cheap-looking tribal tattoos I saw creeping up his arms, I noticed he was also holding what looked like a lead pipe in his right hand at this moment. My body shot full of adrenaline as I turned around and raced back up the stairs. And my approach. I stood facing the now closed door, paralyzed as the man hit the door 3 more times while shouting obscenities at me. He eventually gave up and ran down the stairs and out the front, instead of going down to let her in himself. Mike buzzed her up after just hearing her name, with his train of thought being him thinking that she was a friend of mine. When she reached the door to our unit, he opened it and let her in. He said it seemed like she was confused, mentioning that she was looking for someone named Tim. Mike responded by saying his own name, that no one named Tim lived here. He mentioned she stayed near the entrance of the unit and kept reaching behind her to make sure the door stayed open before leaving only a few moments later. After hearing this, my theory is that these same people came earlier in the day and, not expecting to have someone just let them up through the buzzer, the girl made the mistake of forgetting to keep the door to the building open, rendering the attacker unable to enter during this first attempt. Either way, we both got extremely lucky. That night we did call the police, who arrived and asked for more information about what happened. They asked if there was anyone we knew who might want to do us harm, and we answered no, which was the truth, as this seemed to be a completely random attack. The cops left soon after, saying that there was nothing much they could do. We never saw that Emma girl or her scumbag partner again. The man in the closet. When I was 19, I thought I was untouchable. I had just finished high school and had an almost unhealthy obsession with all things horror, movies, games, you name it. Fear wasn't something I knew, and to be honest, I prided myself on that. It was like a badge of honor, making me seem fearless, especially around the girls I liked. I saw it as my superpower. My friend Megan, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. She suffered from intense lucid dreaming and frequent bouts of sleep paralysis. She'd often tell me how her dreams could shift between whimsical wonderlands and horrifying hellscapes depending on external factors. I couldn't relate. I was a light sleeper, never one to experience nightmares or anything remotely similar. One night, Megan texted me, clearly shaken. She had just woken up from another one of her evil episodes, as she called them, and asked me to come over. When I arrived, she was already asleep, or so I thought. She looked peaceful, and after sitting by her makeup dresser for about 30 minutes, I figured it was safe to leave. Then, it happened. She jolted awake with a scream, unlike anything I'd ever heard. It was muffled, guttural, and filled with terror. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and tears streamed down her face. I rushed to her side, asking if she was okay, but she didn't respond. Her body shook violently, and I held her, trying to calm her down. After what felt like an eternity, she regained control. I stayed a bit longer to make sure she was okay, and when things settled, I headed home. But just as I walked through my door, my phone buzzed. Megan had texted, "The hallucinations won't stop." I replied immediately, asking what she meant, but there was no response. 30 agonizing minutes later, I decided to head back to her house. When I arrived, the scene was surreal. Flashing red and blue lights bathed the street, and officers were swarming the front yard. Panicked, I rushed to the door, only to find Megan speaking to a police officer. She saw me and gestured for me to follow her. What I learned next still haunts me. When I had visited earlier, Megan wasn't asleep. She had been pretending, paralyzed with fear. Behind me, in the shadows of her closet, was a tall, thin man, a stranger. He had been hiding there, clutching a large kitchen knife. My sudden arrival had startled him into staying hidden. Megan, realizing something was off, had somehow managed to quietly dial 911 as I sat just feet away from the man. When I left, the man had started creeping toward her bed, but the sound of sirens sent him fleeing back into the closet, where the police found him moments later. To this day, Megan and I shudder to think what could have happened if I hadn't been there. The thought of that man standing silently behind me, knife in hand, is enough to send chills down my spine. Sometimes real life is scarier than any nightmare.
The woman in the hallway. Very few people experience something so terrifying at a young age that it stays with them for the rest of their lives. Unfortunately, I'm one of those people. I was around 7 or 8 years old when it happened. My older brother Austin and I grew up in a tough household. Our dad was out of the picture, leaving our mom to raise us while working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Our mom worked 2 jobs to provide for us. She'd sometimes have to work night shifts, and would usually have her grandma stay at the house on nights that she had to work. My brother Austin is 2 years younger than me. We were fortunate enough to have our own bedrooms. Given the circumstances, we lived in a small house, but for the 3 of us and on our mum's dime alone, it wasn't terrible. The area in which we lived wasn't amazing, though it was a night like any other. I can't remember if it was a school night or if it was a weekend. I don't remember any tiny details like that, but what I do remember is I was in the living room with my grandma. She was watching TV and I was playing with legs on my Lego table. I was being loud and making a mess with them because I remember my grandma kept saying, "Alex, quiet down." Austin was already in bed. My bedtime was 9:30. Given that it was probably approaching that time, I'm guessing this was a weekend night. Otherwise, my bedtime would have been earlier. The layout of the house was simple. Living room, dining room and kitchen are all connected. And then there was a hallway which led to the bathroom and 3 bedrooms. Our mum's bedroom was at the end of the hall, mine was in the middle. Our grandma would sleep in our mum's bed when she'd stay over to watch us. Eventually, I had to go to sleep. My grandma would always go to sleep early too. So right after saying goodnight to me, she would go to the bathroom to brush her teeth and stuff before going to sleep as well. I was never one to be afraid of the dark or anything, my mum says. I used to be a really brave child, but that night I woke up in the middle of the night. Something unusual for me because I remember myself being a very heavy sleeper. I heard something outside in the hallway, creaks in the floor. The wood floors in that house were always very creaky. Anytime someone walked down the hall, you'd hear it. I thought my grandma was going to the bathroom. However, the creaking didn't stop. It sounded like the creaks were moving back and forth. I got out of bed and went to the door to listen. Now I heard whispering. I was more confused than anything. I thought my grandma was talking to Austin. The woman in the hallway. Very few people experience something so terrifying at a young age that it stays with them for the rest of their lives. Unfortunately, I'm one of those people. I was around 7 or 8 years old when it happened. My older brother Austin and I grew up in a tough household. Our dad was out of the picture, leaving our mom to raise us while working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Our mom worked 2 jobs to provide for us. She'd sometimes have to work night shifts, and would usually have her grandma stay at the house on nights that she had to work. My brother Austin is 2 years younger than me. We were fortunate enough to have our own bedrooms. Given the circumstances, we lived in a small house, but for the three of us and on our mom's dime alone, it wasn't terrible. The area in which we lived wasn't amazing, though it was a night like any other. I can't remember if it was a school night or if it was a weekend. I don't remember any tiny details like that, but what I do remember is I was in the living room with my grandma. She was watching TV and I was playing with legs on my Lego table. I was being loud and making a mess with them because I remember my grandma kept saying, "Alex, quiet down." Austin was already in bed. My bedtime was 9:30. Given that it was probably approaching that time, I'm guessing this was a weekend night. Otherwise, my bedtime would have been earlier. The layout of the house was simple. Living room, dining room and kitchen are all connected. And then there was a hallway which led to the bathroom and 3 bedrooms. Our mum's bedroom was at the end of the hall. Mine was in the middle. Our grandma would sleep in our mum's bed when she'd stay over to watch us. Eventually, I had to go to sleep. My grandma would always go to sleep early too. So right after saying goodnight to me, she would go to the bathroom to brush her teeth and stuff before going to sleep as well. I was never one to be afraid of the dark or anything, my mum says. I used to be a really brave child, but that night I woke up in the middle of the night. Something unusual for me because I remember myself being a very heavy sleeper. I heard something outside in the hallway, creaks in the floor. The wood floors in that house were always very creaky. Anytime someone walked down the hall, you'd hear it. I thought my grandma was going to the bathroom. However, the creaking didn't stop. It sounded like the creaks were moving back and forth. I got out of bed and went to the door to listen. Now I heard whispering. I was more confused than anything. I thought my grandma was talking to Austin.